And then we morphed over into the Clinical Consultation Network maybe about 4 years ago,
Oh, wow.
years ago. I can't believe we haven't had you as a guest before now, actually.
I'm just honored to be here now. I don't care. I'm happy we're in the that's one of the things I've been working on, is being completely in the present. And here we are.
All right, well, it's 12:35. I'm going to get us started. This is the Clinical Consultation Network. Of course, we do this every Tuesday at 12:30. Karyn, you or anybody else is welcome to join us every Tuesday if you want. And we also record these so people can come and hear what people had to say even after it's over. So today we're going to be joined by Dr. Karyn Harvey. She's going to be here to talk to us about trauma and healing. And folks, you're in for a treat because Karyn is a real expert in this area. And so I'm so glad that she was able to join us. Karyn, we'll get right back to you in just a moment. First, I'm going to tell you about what's upcoming on CCN. So on July 25th, we have our fourth Tuesday NAD collaboration with The Good Stuff, which is a book by Dr. Dan Baker and Dr. Uzama Price. They are going to be here to talk to us about that next week. And then on August 1st, we're going to have Dr. Beth Mallow, Janet Schaus, and Sally Furukawa here to talk to us about their ECHO program, which is it's somewhat of a similar type of thing to what we're doing here with CCM, but it's more specifically about healthcare for people with IDD, and they are going to be here to talk to us about that program that they have upcoming on August 1st. August 8th, we're still looking for somebody, so we will have somebody for that spot though, so just stay tuned. And then on August 15th, we've got the AIMS Center. Ann Protano Biggs is going to be here to talk to us. Let's see, we got this because I believe when Johnny Payne presented, he talked about the AIMS Center. And so we wanted to have the AIMS Center on here to talk specifically about their program. So they'll be here on August 15th. So it's now time for your Get Smarticle. Karyn, you'll recognize that as Maxwell Smart from the old Get Smart show. And so each week we try to do a Get Smarticle. And so today's Get Smarticle was contributed by Karyn, and it is by Presnell et al. And it is alignment between intellectual and developmental service providers in trauma-informed care, an exploratory study. Next slide. So a little bit of the background here is that people with IDD are 3 to 6 more times likely than the general population to be abused or neglected. 65% of children with IDD and mental health conditions experience at least one potentially traumatizing event. And 70% of people with IDD experienced at least one traumatizing event during their lifetime in the Scotty et al. Study. So it really underscores the need for training in trauma-informed care in organizations that provide care to people with IDD. I mean, it's ubiquitous. It's part of what we do. We have to be prepared to do this. Next slide. So some of the research questions here, I paraphrased them a bit. They were more complex, but basically, are providers aware of trauma-informed care? Are there differences in awareness by staff role? What training do staff receive in their organizations? Do organizations provide trauma-informed care training? And what are challenges to providing trauma-informed care? Next slide. The method, this was a statewide survey done in Indiana. The authors put together a survey that they basically made available to everybody in Indiana via a program called Qualtrics, which I recently became aware of. Qualtrics does a lot of surveys like this. So it was an electronic survey that they sent out to everyone in Indiana. Everybody didn't respond, but they sent it out to everybody. And so it was that they ended up having 288 respondents who fell into 5 categories here. There were DSPs, clinical staff, managers, leadership, and other ancillary staff that may not be listed there. Next slide. So I'm going to show you tables 3 through 5. I'm going to have to share for just a second Babs' to do this, and then we'll come back to the slides. I've got to remember how to share. Okay, share content. There it is. Am I sharing? So there were a couple numbers here that I thought were particularly notable. I don't have time to go through the whole study, but one of the questions was people with IDD are more likely than others without disabilities to experience trauma. It was interesting that most of the leadership staff, like clinical staff, managers and directors, leadership and ancillary folks, knew that that was true, but a lot of DSPs did not know that that was true. And so that's a really, Karyn, I don't know if you can remember, there was a fellow years ago that I met named Lee Graber, and he talked about DSPs being the most important part of the system because they were, this is a dated reference, but he said they were like the diamond needle that touched the record. If you didn't have a good needle on your record player, you weren't going to be able to play good records. So I'm showing my age by bringing up that reference, but it really shows the importance of DSPs being trained and aware of trauma-informed care. Also, coming down, my agency strives to determine if the people we support have experienced trauma. Only 78.1% of the respondents said that that was true of their agency, so that's an area of deficit as well. Employees at my agency may have had traumatic experiences. Only 77.6% said that. And if you look to the first column, which is the DSP column, it says 68.3% of DSPs believe that. We know that a great number of people in our service system who provide services have experienced trauma before. And so that's something very important to understand because sometimes they can be triggered by different things that may happen in that environment. Also, employees who have experienced trauma can be triggered. So what I was just saying, 84.2% of DSPs believe that, whereas in the other groups, a higher percentage agreed with that statement. And finally, the work environment influences how an employee does their job. I was surprised that the rate was so low on this, but it is an important thing that how the work environment influences people in doing their jobs. And so only 80.8% of people believe that, leaving about 20% that did not. On table 4, I just wanted to point out the lowest score. So regarding familiarity with trauma-informed care, and I think I've seen this a lot of times, is, we've got a lot of people at the therapist clinician level who understand what trauma-informed care is all about, but how is that filtered to the direct support professionals? And so you can see they had the lowest score as it related to familiarity with trauma-informed care. And then on this last slide, last table, I wanted to review just one thing: how to respond. So this was evaluation of training that they get and what things are covered within the training. And the lowest rated item there was how to respond to trauma and things that we can basically, for example, things that we can do to help people with IDD heal from trauma. Only 50.3% of people responded that they knew how to do that, or that their training addressed that issue. And so there's another big area of deficit. So I'm going to stop sharing now, Babs, and let you go back to the PowerPoint, and I'll make those last 2 points and then we'll move on. So, basically what this comes down to is a great number of staff people in Indiana report that they're aware of the need for trauma-informed care. I think we saw that in this study, but it does also underscore that more training may be needed to ensure organizations can support people with trauma effectively. And so Dr. Karyn Harvey, that is what your whole life's work has been all about, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for having me today. I'm just so honored to be here and excited.
Well,
Wonderful. Yeah,
yeah,
and
I'm glad you
I
told.
picked that article. It was so important to me because it highlights the importance of training and the fact that the DSP is left out. And I believe understanding the trauma model or that paradigm where people need support. And the most important thing of a person who has trauma, the most important factor is that they feel safe. And oftentimes our interventions don't create that sense of safety.
Yeah, yeah,
So what I've been doing, I love that article. I was so excited to see it because it puts it all out there. One thing that I started doing the last 5 years or so is I developed a manual and slides, and I train trainers and I just give it to them. And so people can do new hire trainings and refreshers in their agency, so that they can have trauma-informed supports as part of their rotation, because I believe it should be a required training.
yeah, absolutely. Now, before we launch too far into that part of it, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and don't forget to include that at the conclusion, your fun fact about
Ah,
yourself.
okay, well, I don't know what you want to know. I'm an old lady who's worked in this field forever. And I have learned a lot because I made many mistakes, and that was been, and I've learned from the wonderful people that I've supported when I got it wrong, and I didn't always get it right, but I learned when I was getting closer. And I learned from the DSPs, and I have to say they've been my greatest teachers with, all the school, all the degrees, Bruce, right?
Oh, yeah,
Right? So
absolutely.
I've worked in the field for 37 years, and I've always been, for the most part, inside of a provider agency. For years, I was at the ARC Baltimore. Before
Right.
that, I was at some other agencies. Now I am doing therapy and doing a lot of speaking and writing because, time is running out and I feel like I have to speak more and write more to get this idea of supporting people in a trauma-informed way kind of out there. So I guess a fun fact, I chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I practice Buddhism. And
Okay.
I started as a teenager, and I thought it was just going to be one more phase of all the crazy phases I went through involving all kinds of things, including illegal drug use and everything else. But somehow I stuck with this. Now I'm finding out that all that was a psychiatric intervention. Who knew?
Yeah, yeah. So I was just going to point
It's
out
ahead of the
DBT
ball.
is based on Zen Buddhism and
Right. So I
mindfulness,
practice Nichiren
such a
Buddhism,
big
which is,
practice.
yeah. So the Buddhism I practice is very different because we chant and it's very active and
Oh,
we work for world peace. And when I started working in this field, I came in with the perspective that these folks, this is just one life, that they've had many lifetimes. And
okay.
in this life, they are learning something important. And I was kind of shocked to see people treating them as though they were subhuman and marginalizing them when who knows, it could have been, Roosevelt, it could have been
Right.
Churchill, we could be, who knows who
Right.
is who.
Yeah.
And I, so that was kind of what got me on this path of looking at people differently and kind of honoring their, trying to really honor their humanity. It was, I had to grow to do that as well, but to really look at people's humanity and who they were and understand how little importance IQ is. And often IQ has nothing to do with intelligence, right?
All right.
And just kind of see who they really are and have that exploration. And so that Buddhism and the Buddhist path of Nichiren Buddhism, which is with the SGI, we're looking for, world peace and individual happiness, that's their goals, kind of has informed a lot of what I've done because I see people as having just one life here
Mm-hmm.
of many. And
Many,
that,
yeah.
they came to learn to take it to their next life and to, be able to really get what they need out of this one rather than be warehoused somewhere.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. It's sometimes I wonder if we've had even different worlds, in sequence. And so that's an interesting perspective. You said a minute ago that you've made many mistakes in your work, and I can relate. I think all clinicians can relate to that. I wonder if it might help a little bit, maybe just talk a little bit about some of those
Yeah.
things that you've encountered over the years that may have taught you something.
Well, I had some interesting training in graduate school. So I had two tracks, right? I had the clinical track where I was learning how to be a therapist. And then I studied with Charles Catania, who had studied for many years and was a disciple of B.F. Skinner.
Right.
So I, brought those tools I worked in different jobs, but then I ended up working, found my people. I was very happy about that. And working in this field and working under another experimental psychologist. So I did a lot of very traditional behavioral interventions, wrote some very traditional behavior plans. And so one person that I talk about is this fellow who was out of the institution, and they asked me to write a plan because he wouldn't take a shower, he wouldn't wear clean clothes, he wouldn't do anything. And we treated him as non-compliant, and we did our functional assessment. And actually, back then we called it an analysis, but it wasn't really. And because you can't control all environmental factors. So we did that, and I looked at that and I said, oh, okay, this guy it's all about escape, and his behaviors escape, and he's being manipulative. And that's what everyone said. And I went along with it, and I wrote the plan. The plan didn't work. We gave him, first we gave him sodas to take a shower, and he would just take the soda and put on the water, turn off the water, said, I got the shower, and took a shower. Then the next thing he did, we upped the ante and did our reinforcement survey and gave him money. And he was so happy about that. He was this pirate type guy, and he was real gruff, and his name was James, and his arm was twisted, right? And you could tell there was a genetic disorder. And he was like, yeah, I'll take that money. Yeah, I'll take a shower. Yeah, sounds good. And so he would just turn the shower on, turn the shower off. And then that's when we found out he knew how to open the med cabinet where we kept the money. And he took the money. But then the perfect behavior plan came along, and her name was Sarah. And I love telling this story because I really believe in relationships. And right now, I'm actually working very hard on a dating app for people for relationships, particularly just for people with disabilities, because I've seen relationships heal people from their trauma and change their lives. And he fell in love with a woman named Sarah, and he asked her to marry him. And this was the only plan that worked, because she said to him, no way, I will not marry you because you stink. Because he did smell really bad. He wouldn't take a shower. He wouldn't wear clean clothes. And so then he started taking a shower and wearing clean clothes. And I was like, okay, I'm done. None of my plans work. Let me just support this relationship. They did get married when he cleaned up his act. I started doing couples counseling because I had to learn how to do that because they needed some help. And in that experience, he opened up and told us all the years he'd been in the institution, dropped off as a toddler. That's so many people, right? Dropped off as a toddler, been in the institution. And he had been every single night for years up until his mid-30s when he finally left. They had to strip naked and they were hosed down like cattle, in this big gym. And I saw the gym because one of my jobs was taking people out of there. And I saw people screaming, rocking in their own excrement, just terrible conditions. And he opened up and said, I hate water being sprayed on me because it reminds me of being hosed down every night. So, boy, did I get it wrong. He wasn't being non-compliant. He was being triggered because of his trauma. And the one thing that really healed him was his love and relationship with Sarah. And sadly, she died. She passed away. She had Down syndrome, and so often we see Alzheimer's with that. But that death did not devastate him. He went on to be an advocate, and he helped to advocate to close the institution. And he was right there in the front with Mayor O'Malley cutting a ribbon when they closed it, which is silly. I don't know why they cut the ribbon, but it was so great to see him. And guess what? He was on the front page of the Baltimore Sun, and a cousin of his, like he had lost all his family when they dropped him off as a toddler. A cousin of him saw him and said, oh my God, that's my cousin. They had the same last name. And she reconnected him with family. So he then found his mission and purpose and found family. So I learned from him, right, that what matters is relationships, and that's what heals you. And it
Yeah.
isn't like how much we can control people. And I stopped looking at people as getting over, and I started to try to see what happened to you and what do you need for support. So, that was, I always
Yeah.
tell that story. I have 10,000 of them in terms of me getting it wrong.
You mentioned though this shifting of the question basically that you had with people, because that seems really important. And I know that we have a Building Strong Brains program here for kids in Tennessee. We're trying to do things to help them make the neural connections that they need to make to be able to do things and to live a functional life. And then we say, instead of the question shifts from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And
Exactly.
and that seemed to be what you were referring to, or something like that you were referring to.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the pioneers in the trauma world is Bruce Perry. Um, Fantastic psychiatrist, wrote a really important book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, which is, I think, a must read for anyone working with kids with IDD. Um, and he just illuminated that whole issue. Like, these kids are traumatized. They're not manipulating. And they can't always be controlled with contingencies or rewards or punishments, because it's so much deeper than that. There's such a well of pain, and they need to feel safe, and they need nurturing. And the same is with adults. The same is with adults. And people are adults a lot longer than their children. And so I think it's really important that we have that paradigm shift in the supports we give to kids, as well as the supports we give to adults with IDD, because they're so traumatized in so many cases, like repeated foster care placements, all kinds of abuse. We now have statistics showing us that sexual abuse of people with intellectual disabilities is through the roof, you know?
It's a lot of times I have this experience where I'm trying to think about a case diagnostically and trying to come up with a diagnosis for somebody. And you'll often look at a lot of this stuff and maybe think it's something else. You'll think it's like psychosis or some other difficulty that somebody's having where they're doing these sort of bizarre things that you see. But oftentimes that can be related to a trauma that somebody's experienced that's offbeat. The person may not be able to communicate it that well. And so it comes out in a very bizarre way, but it really has a very simple explanation. I wonder if you might comment on that.
9 times out of 10, nine
Yeah.
times out of 10, Bruce, I mean, it's, thank you for saying that, because, I always used to train my staff. I would always, I always had staff I was training and psychossociates, like, hey, if you see more than 4 or 5 diagnoses, look at trauma, trauma, you
Yeah,
know? And then my other thing is, if the medication doesn't work, and boy, do we pile on the cocktails. If
right.
the medication isn't working and the behavior plan isn't working, you look at trauma. And then look at the fact that sometimes people aren't having a behavioral response, they're not manipulating, they're having a trauma response. And that entails triggers, right? And an amygdala, that danger signal in the brain that's flashing and sending all kinds of chemicals, adrenaline and cortisol, and to throughout the body, and putting that person on high alert. And then maybe they're going to fight because the best defense is a good offense, or run, right? Or do whatever, maybe shut down, to protect themselves. And so many of these responses are to stay safe or to get safe. I would say, in all these years of working with folks, 99% of the aggression I've seen was out of fear and an attempt to protect oneself.
You talked about brain changes, and one of the things I've observed, because there's a lot of interpretation of the responses you have. Maybe it's non-compliance, or maybe sometimes people think this is just, like you said, defiance. I just don't want to do this, or I am very angry at other people, and this kind of thing. I don't know. In my experience, I find that so many people are really trying hard to not have those things happen.
Yes.
And I looked at it like, they're trying to hold the top of a kettle down, a boiling kettle down, and then at some point it just overwhelms and they can't hold it anymore. Uh, have you seen that type of effect with some of the folks you've worked with?
I love the kettle analogy. That's exactly it. And you can always tell if it's a trauma response or someone or a behavioral issue. And sometimes people have no power, so all they have is their behavior, right? So we
Right.
get that. But when it's a trauma response, look at what happens after. If there's a lot of shame, I'm sorry, I'm a bad person. If for the next several months they keep telling you about how they did a bad thing, you know, I'm a bad person. Look, my behavior is bad. So many people I know, if you ask them how they're doing, they'll just report to you about their behavior. They won't even be able to tell you their emotional state.
Yeah.
And if you see that level of shame, if you see identification by behavior, if you see that, that I'm a bad person, that really negative alteration in cognition and mood, which is a symptom area of post-traumatic stress disorder, then you're looking at somebody with PTSD who exploded, did not want to, like you said, that a brain has changed and it's in terror and it's flashing, and they didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
They didn't want to do that.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about Charles Catania. I wonder if are there still elements of that you bring into your work, or have you completely moved past that behavior analytic origin that you had?
Great question. Well, I've been through different phases. I'm growing up now. I'm maturing a little. I'm less radical. And recently I've done a series of trainings with some BCBAs out of Minnesota, out of the state. And I have a training that I've been doing in many places of trauma-informed behavior plans and how to meld doing a functional assessment along with having a trauma assessment.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important that we blend the two and that we look at, if we're going to have a behavior plan in place, we should also identify what triggers that person. And those triggers may be very irrational, and we may not know the story behind it. That's the thing about our field. When we say what happened to you, we won't always know. We
Right.
maybe have to do a little CSI work to see what the triggers are. And sometimes we can piece together the story. But to have in the behavior plan a trauma history is really critical. As much as we know what happened to this person, right? What the triggers are, so we can have that setting environment that keeps the person safe, right? That makes them feel psychologically safe. And then, really importantly, what makes that person truly feel connected in their world, truly feels present in the present. So I have a little triangle: safety, connection, and empowerment. How can you give that person a sense of safety? How can they have a sense of connection to people, which is really critical in healing? And how can they have some power or control or live a life where they feel that they have agency and can move their own life forward rather than always be at the mercy of everybody else's decisions for them? And those three factors I think are really critical and should be involved in behavior plans when the behavior plan is trauma informed.
Yeah, you mentioned that about connection. That seems to be such an important thing. I watched a video recently, a TED Talk by a guy named Johann Hari. He's an expert um, in addictions. This is one of his big things, and he talked about how connection with other people, being able to have relationships with other people, was such an important factor in treating addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addiction. And he brought up Portugal, which has completely decriminalized uh, drugs. They've decriminalized it, and they've put that money back into helping people make these connections, and they've had a 50% reduction in addictions in Portugal as a result of this radical approach that they've taken. Seems like it's a similar approach to what we take with people who have trauma as well.
And we don't take it with people who have trauma and have intellectual disabilities. And I've heard about that, about Portugal. I believe our biggest problem in our field, we have a lot of problems, right? We don't have enough supports. We don't have enough psychiatric services. We don't have therapists like we should have. That's another quest. But our biggest problem is loneliness.
Yeah.
That isolation and that loneliness, that it makes people to re-experience their trauma. It sets them back, and it's a horrible way to live. And now there's all this research coming out showing that loneliness is highly correlated with early mortality. It's more dangerous. The Harvard men's study showed that there was more death from correlated with loneliness than obesity.
Oh my.
And
Yeah.
then the Surgeon General just said that loneliness poses a health risk as deadly as smoking 15 or more cigarettes a day. So, I think we have to really actively rethink how we give services. And just because people are living with people doesn't mean that's who they want to be with. And so many folks would like a boyfriend or girlfriend that they actually have in their room, not just, and maybe marry, not just say, this is my boyfriend or girlfriend at the day program, but to have that rich and full life, of connection. The Harvard men's study showed that relationships was the biggest factor correlated with happiness versus anything else, money, education. They looked at all these people from Harvard versus all these people from the poor section in Boston. There's a great TED talk by Robert Waldinger on it, and a book called The Good Life. And they found that even, no matter how rich, no matter how high their position was, no matter what the issue, some of the happiest people were the poorest, and some with the lowest position, because it was about relationships, the people that had the best marriages and the best friendships. Maybe they weren't married, but they had very close friends. But the ones who had the richest relationships were the happiest and died the happiest, because they did a long-term study following them throughout their life.
That's a wow moment, but not a surprising moment, really, because when you think about it, that is the key. Babs, we've had several comments. I'm not sure if we've had any questions or not, but you want to review a few of the comments or questions that we may have had?
Yeah, the first one was, where do you practice?
Baltimore, Maryland. But I do a lot all over the place.
Okay, and then I love the way you use the term paradigm shift. Is that, and this is why it's taking so long for us to change systems to become trauma informed. So that was from Janice Ryan.
Thank you. I agree. We've got to get there.
We got a question. Wouldn't his girlfriend not liking him smelling bad be the consequence for the controlling of his shower behavior? Her not wanting to date or be near him anymore if he doesn't shower regularly and smells bad.
Yes, we can definitely say that. At the same time, he loves soda, he loved money. Those were not strong enough reinforcers. It's the relationship, the love, and the connection that was the reinforcer. And we can look at it that way, like say this is the reinforcer. But I think it's more important for us to train the DSP on the most human terms possible, so that they can understand the importance of supporting people in not being lonely, in having relationships, in healing from their trauma, and in, having lots of positives. But I really believe so strongly, and thank you for this comment, that we have to have non-contingent reinforcement. We can't just have people earning every single thing in their life. That non-contingency is so critical, and part of people taking their power back is sometimes saying, no, your contingencies aren't going to control me. I'll find my workaround, because I need power in my life.
And some people are not at a stage where they're ready for any kind of contingencies like this. You've got to make it non-contingent just to get them in contact with what makes their life better, ultimately.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree so much. I have worked with a number of people who would sabotage the reward and would just blow it right before they earned it,
Yeah.
because they had so much emotion about it and so much anxiety, and and then also resentment for being controlled, that you're holding this carrot up and I don't appreciate that. I want to be treated like everybody else. And also the anxiety that built up around, maybe I'll blow it, so I'll just go ahead and blow it. So I think it's important to have a quality of life first, exactly as you say, Bruce.
Babs, are there others?
There are. From Janet Schaus, how do we find out about those traumas if a person isn't able to communicate well enough to tell us about such incidents?
This is a little bit radical, but what I've been saying for years is assume trauma. It's traumatic to not be able to communicate when the rest of the world is.
Absolutely.
It's traumatic to be bullied, and just about everybody with a disability has been bullied. Kids are cruel. It's traumatic to be excluded. We have neurological research that shows us exclusion actually causes physical pain in the brain. We have a lot of research showing us the impact of just bullying and exclusion. And just about everybody with an intellectual disability has been bullied and excluded.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. And so my wife had she was retiring recently, and they had a big party over at a place called Arrington Vineyards near here, which is a big place to go drink wine
Yeah.
in Tennessee. And so they were having a big party, but it was all women. And I wanted to go so bad. But they told me, no, this is just for the ladies this time. And I understood it. It was appropriate for them to have that, but I still felt that feeling of exclusion from that.
Yeah.
And uh, and I think the people we work with feel that every day, and like you say, over time that becomes traumatizing, and they've experienced it really a lot since they were young children because of their disability.
This is a reality. I've worked a lot with families as well. I've had so many families tell me with pain, sometimes tears in their eyes, that when their kid finally got included into a classroom, they never got invited to the birthday party. And it was painful.
Yeah, it's very painful.
Exclusion is pain. So we can assume trauma.
Right.
Doesn't mean we necessarily have PTSD, but often
Right.
I believe PTSD is on a spectrum, and I just saw some recent research supporting that. So you can have different degrees of it. So people have trauma just from being so excluded in their lives. Dr. Price, I'm so glad you're having two friends of mine, Dr. Baker and Dr. Price. I'm actually know Dr. Baker a lot better, but I love both of their work and I can't wait to read their book. And she says, it's like you're a tourist in your community with so many of our community engaged activities. You're just riding in a van, watching everybody live their life, or sitting at the mall, eating your bologna sandwich, watching people eat their boardwalk fries. And, when my last job, we got calls from the mall saying, stop bringing your people. They knew they didn't belong there.
Yeah.
And the mall people asked them to stop because they said they're taking up chairs and they're not spending any money. So our community inclusion, when done wrong, is actually creating exclusion.
Yeah. Such an important point. Babs, are there any other comments or questions?
There are more comments, no more questions at this time. Brittany said, ideally, a review of previous provider notes or practice related to unexpected behaviors or interviews with the client's natural supports may reveal relevant stories. Jason said, I agree. What is important?
Can I just say thank you to Brittany? That's so true. And that's how I've gotten to so many of the trauma histories. Thank you so much.
Jason said, yes, I agree. While that's important, what is important is to identify what triggers the person and not whether the trigger is rational or not. I would guess many triggers are not rational.
Exactly. I have stories.
And then Janet says, amen to non-contingencies.
Okay. I think this interview is setting the record for the most audience participation that we've had. So that's a great testament to you, Karyn. I was going to ask you a little bit about your dating. Is it a dating app that you have, or what is it that you put together? I have become a big fan of that television show, Autism on
Love on the Spectrum.
Love on the Spectrum, which sounds like you're trying to approach something like that. It seems like that's a much needed thing.
Yeah, thank you for asking me about it. So I have to tell you, all these years, I do a lot of therapy with folks, which was the main reason I went back to school, because the person supervising me wouldn't let me do therapy. And I'm like, they need therapy. And then I just heard so many stories of sexual abuse. We know now, we have the statistics, how much sexual abuse. And then I thought, well, I'm always thinking, what can we do for prevention? Not just talk about it, not just treat it. I was so tired of treating it. And so many of these sexual abuse cases and crisis work that I did was about somebody wanting a boyfriend, and the predator, I'll be your boyfriend, or I'm going to marry you. I bet many of you have heard these situations, right? And I love this one woman I worked with because she said, if he wanted to be my boyfriend, he wanted to marry me. And that was the devastating thing when she found out that this rape that occurred was really, she said, that's what you have to do if you have a boyfriend. And we're like, no, he was married and now he's being arrested. And the devastation was that, of course, the rape was horrible, but that person wouldn't marry her, the betrayal. So I got a call from a guy named Kevin Drumheller, who's an executive director here in Maryland of an agency called Ridgecroft. And he said, I want to do a dating app. I need a consulting psychologist, and I need someone to write stories so that people can read stories about people like themselves, having love, getting dumped, all the things we all go through, coming out to your parents, And so I'm like, okay, let's do this. And then he found an online training company that put up the money and animated the stories that I wrote. And I said, because I told him, I don't want to be the psychologist. I want to write the stories.
Yeah.
That's more fun. And then we were looking for a clinic that would give therapy and therapeutic supports. Couldn't find anyone because everybody says, well, we don't work with people with disabilities. We're not trained, right? Which makes me crazy. I always say, are you trained in working with humans? But that's all right. Don't let me get on that soapbox. But so we just decided, I said, you know what? Let's just train coaches. So we trained a bunch of relationship coaches. We're going live in the next couple of weeks. We're right now on the web, helloitsme.com. Somebody posted it. And, both my kids met their significant others on Bumble.
I can recall, back in the days when we had sheltered workshops, go in and, ask somebody, and there'd always be in some of these small communities, a person there who said, I ain't never having any boyfriend. I don't want no boyfriend. They're too much trouble. I'm just not going to do that. And I often felt that those folks were just repeating something maybe they'd heard, or they were so hopeless in really having a relationship with somebody that they'd adopted that really extreme view of it. And it seems like to me that, I mean, of course, you always respect somebody's what they say about something or how they respond to something, but not having the opportunity is often a reason that people just kind of close themselves off to things and don't ever get
Exactly. And sometimes families tell them that that's what they don't want because they're
right.
scared. Families have trauma. So
Yeah.
I've been doing a bunch of relationship trainings with folks who are receiving supports. And I love that you said that because I was, working with people because I believe this is how we inoculate folks against abuse. If you're in a relationship and you're not lonely, then you're not going to be as vulnerable. You're not vulnerable because you have a disability. You're vulnerable because you're lonely.
Yeah.
And so I had this one fellow, we're talking about relationships and we're talking, and I will answer that question, and we're going on, and his mother's sitting right next to him in the Zoom group. It was a Zoom group. And she's like, but you're happy single, remember? But you want to be single, remember? And then he kind of the button turned on, like, yes, I'm happy single and I want to be single. And my heart broke because I see this a lot, right? That people really don't even know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so important. And somebody asked, we have with the app, I've had people who have been catfished on Tinder. I've known people without disabilities catfished on Tinder, but people on Facebook that I've supported who, gave some money. We have a bunch of stories about, educating people about when someone's taking advantage. We have some videos and stories and lessons about consent, but we also have a full-time administrator who's going to be monitoring the chats and looking for keywords. We have a whole series of keywords that get red flags like money and sex, and so they can monitor the chat. So we do have that built in because that does happen, and we know that. But I feel that it's worth the risk, and it's all about the dignity of risk because it's a bigger risk to be lonely.
And we can sit here and protect someone, but part of having relationships is risk. You're putting yourself out there. You're making yourself somewhat vulnerable. Of course, we want to try to not make ourselves too vulnerable to be abused in some manner, but you have to take that risk in order to get the reward from
Yeah.
it.
And we have stories about people who are abused and in abusive relationships, making it really clear. We have little lessons that we give with the stories about, it's not okay to be abused in any way, emotionally or physically. So we do try to have that educational piece.
That's a good thing. When it comes to training of organizations, you know, because part of that article we read early on was about trauma-informed care, trying to have your organization be fully aware and trained in trauma-informed care. Um, Tell us a little bit about some of the training that you've done with agencies and how that is implemented within an organization.
Oh, thank you. So I've been working with agencies and becoming a trauma-informed agency, and that has several aspects. First is an overall training on trauma-informed supports, to trying to get as many people to attend that. But then I always try and help train trainers so that I give them the manual, the slides. I have a very clear, easy to do trauma-informed support training that a trainer can do. And so I work with them and train them on how to do that training. I also do a training on trauma-informed leadership, which is critical as far as I'm concerned, training the frontline manager to be trauma-informed with the DSP, which is another important aspect of that article that I love, that they talk about the trauma of the DSPs. And the DSPs know. So how can we have trauma-informed management? That means consistency, not having favoritism, not pushing people to their limit, you know, having face-to-face supervision. There's a number of things that organizational psychology shows us that we should do in order to make an employee feel supported. So I have a training about that, and the trauma-informed behavior plan training. So kind of a package. To me, the most important thing, and I've been doing this with several states, is training trainers. You know, but I'd love to do that whole package with everybody. But most importantly is that people will do the training beyond me, because I can't get, and often I can't reach the DSP because they can't afford to have them come to the training. But if I train a trainer, then that DSP gets the training.
Spreading it
Sometimes
throughout.
done better than I could do it. Often.
I doubt that, but we got a couple more comments out here, Babs.
We do. I got one privately that I wanted to read. That it says it's not enough to be dating. They need sexual education too. We infantilize people with disabilities and don't provide them with the information they need to be safe, which was interesting. So I wanted to put that out there.
Yeah.
We have stories about sex. We're going to get more materials about sex. It's very important. I'm really committed to people having wonderful lives that are full and include sex. I think that, and sex education, it's a terrible crime that folks with disabilities often don't receive sex education when the rest of the world does. I am so adamant about that. Thank you for that. It's so true.
It's such a key part, learning. It's not just, okay, I can have a relationship, but how do you have a relationship
Right.
is so, so important. And we blame people for making mistakes in that when we haven't really taught them how to do it.
Exactly. And we have to just jump in and start doing this. I mean,
Yes,
this is
absolutely.
life, and people they deserve that rich, full life, not just to be living with the people they live with and bowling every week, but having a better, rich, fulfilling, and living with the people they love, right? Having marriages, having relationships,
Absolutely.
sex, you know, heterosexual, whatever people choose.
We have two more comments and one question. So one of the comments is, I've heard stories from clients about being taught the jingle, I won't date till I'm 28, and it breaks my heart because it's emotionally abusive.
I agree.
Another one is, it's so sad to see all these well-meaning loved ones set their IDD relatives up for loneliness because their own internal ableism related to relationships on the disability spectrum.
Yeah. And, you know, they're scared. So what we're going to do, I'm trying to talk the owner of the online company into letting me run parents groups. I really want to work, because I've done that in the past. And I think having parent groups helps a lot, you know, and having the parents whose kids have relationships encourage the parents who are scared about it is much more powerful than anything I can do. So the group work is important.
All right, so one question is, can you share your contact information to talk about the Train the Trainer consultation? So we can put your contact information in there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my email, Karyn, Karyn, Harvey.org. I mean, sorry, that's the website. The email is Karyn, Karyn, Harvey 911 @gmail.com. And my website is KarynHarvey.org, Karyn with the Y. Still Karyn, I can't believe what happened to my name, right? I'm so not a Karen.
Yeah, well, that's true. You are
It's
not.
embarrassing.
If it comes to insisting that people get the appropriate care, though, I think you are a little bit of a Karen, and that's not a bad thing. So, um,
That's
so
fine, Bruce.
um, thing I wanted to mention, I'd said early on you were one of our keynote speakers at the NAD conference. I do want to remind everybody that's a 10 NAD conference. That's coming up on August 17th. So if people are interested in going to that, they can go to the 10 NAD website and register. But you were one of our keynote speakers several years ago. You've also been a big member of the NAD organization. Of course, that's very near and dear to my heart. What has your association with NAD been over these years, and how important has that been in your development?
NAD is wonderful. I love NAD because no one was talking about mental health except for NAD 30
Yeah,
years ago.
right.
Right. So NAD broke ground on every level, and they published my first book, which I will be eternally grateful for, Positive Identity. I've just got, and that's where I learned how to present, because you could go to back in the day, you could go to the conference for free, and I never had any money. So I would just put a presentation in. If you presented, you could go for free. And that's what trained me in how to present. So I owe everything to NAD.
And I hope you're going to be here in Nashville when NAD comes to Nashville in December. Are you going to be able to make it?
I'm hoping to.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, Karyn, I appreciate so much you coming on and being our guest today. You're a wonderful guest, and we need to have you back again, definitely at some point in the future. But thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all the things you said too. I think, just great questions and great dialogue. We are just on the same sheet here.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you to all our audience. Of course, as I said in the beginning, we do this every week, 12:30 Central Time. Join us anytime for the Clinical Consultation Network. So long, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.